What up, Felix?
Salam alaikum. What up? What up?
Wa alaikum salam, man. Wa alaikum salam.
All right. You're going to be polite today?
Am I gonna be polite today?
No, you're
What?
pretty polite. You're pretty
Thank
chill.
you, thank you. I've
We
always
talked. We
been,
talked before.
yeah, I've always been good to you, man.
Yeah, yeah. Likewise.
Have you ever dealt with this topic before?
Yeah, yeah. It's just strange to me because Islam didn't exist 2,000 years ago. There was no Quran, so I mean, I don't know how you're going to get any money from anybody.
By the way, guys, this is Felix. He's a Muslim. Remember, he's a Muslim. So, and he's saying it's impossible to prove this, right? It doesn't make any sense.
Like, I mean, there was no Quran back then, so how could around the time of Jesus? So
There was no Quran back then. There was no Islam back then. So how in the world is any Muslim gonna apply the name Muslim, the title Muslim, on Jesus? That's the point. That's the point, Felix.
yeah, but what I'm going to do is just redefine Muslim, but for Islam, and say Muslims were godly people, like your equivalent of Old Testament saints. I'm just going to say, oh, whoever obeyed Allah to the best of their knowledge, like so I'm going to say James the Apostle and Jesus themselves and John the Baptist were Muslims because they obeyed God.
Can you be a Muslim and believe that Jesus is your Lord and is the God that you submit to?
Not as a God, but Lord. I don't know about Lord.
Who are you a
Varies,
servant? Who are you a servant of?
Worship. You cannot worship a man, basically.
Okay, who are you a servant of?
Allah, no?
Okay, well, so then you're not a servant of anybody else. So the Lord who you serve, your baby's loud. The God who you serve and who you are a slave of, it's God alone. So you cannot be a slave of anyone else. Would you agree?
Yeah.
All right, so like I told you last night, James says that he's a slave of the Lord Jesus Christ. He believes that Jesus is divine.
Yeah, yeah. I went back to that, and
So
even that is disputed whether James, the brother of Jesus, even wrote that epistle.
But you appealed to that epistle. You appealed to that epistle and said, this is where we find the historical Jesus, and this is where we even know what James believed. You appealed to that last night, right?
Yes, I did.
It's not disputed. It's
in the text.
Yeah. So James believed that Jesus is his divine Lord, who he is a slave of. So he can't be a Muslim, right?
If I'm following James, even if we take away Paul, if I'm following James from that, whoever wrote that epistle, if he was James, yeah, not really. I can't, because you can't be a slave of anyone but Allah.
Very good. And if we're following James, then Muhammad's a false prophet, right?
The James of the epistle, yeah. If I'm following that,
James,
the epistle.
Yeah, James, the brother of Jesus, who wrote the epistle, who was the leader of the Church of Jerusalem. If you're following him, then Muhammad's a false prophet according to James, and Islam is false.
Yeah, there's a discrepancy, because if I'm a slave of Jesus or Christ, according to James, right? Like you said, verse 1, how can I follow Muhammad?
Exactly. So now I need you to answer this. What are you going to do?
Well, that doesn't defend Paul or the problems with the Bible.
Who cares? Who cares about Paul? I'm going with your standard of criteria. Your standard of criteria, the historical Jesus found in James. You believe James is a true believer and servant of God who taught the truth. You believe that the Didache and the gospel teaches the historical Jesus. So with using the material that we have, based on this material, the Didache, the Epistle of James, the Gospel, Islam is false, and Muhammad's a false prophet. You can't believe in Muhammad while also affirming these other sources.
I can't take away that verse and say that's a later Christian interpolation, but I wouldn't have evidence for that. I would just be.
Then you can't do that. Exactly. Then you can't do that. And this is where I like you, Felix, because you see but before even doing it, you see the problem with doing that, with just trying to defend Islam with no basis, right? Just making a claim with no foundation, just in efforts to defend Islam. That's what Muslims have to do to defend Islam. They have to just do that. Isn't that crazy? Imagine that.
Yeah. If your goal, your bias for any religion, Christians or Muslims, if their goal is automatically to defend, if there's a problem in the logic, then we gotta find something else. Like, oh, that verse isn't inspired. Oh, that verse was corrupted. So use only the parts of the Bible that fit Islam and vice versa.
Which is
Yeah.
dishonest to do, right?
It can be very dishonest. I gotta agree.
Yeah. So
I was a Christian first, and then I became Muslim. So I use philosophy and history as well for both religions. I kind of use those to examine both.
So with using that to examine both, especially in this subject here, you see that you can't be if you're going to be honest, you can't be a Muslim, and you just can't, or else you'll just be sitting in a historical falsehood.
I would have to see the same contradictions that I see in the Bible. That's a huge one. Or maybe if I would have to just completely disbelieve that Muhammad even had an experience at all.
Yes. Or no, you just could just disbelieve that his experience was from God. People have spiritual experiences all the time, but it doesn't mean that every spiritual experience is from God. You know,
right.
See me, I believe Muhammad had an experience. I do. I believe he had an experience. I just don't believe it was from God. So with this,
so both gentlemen, let's pull up both gentlemen, Paul and Muhammad. They come back from the dead as zombies. This is hypothetically. Muhammad says, "No, I had a real experience with Allah," and then Paul says, "No, I had a real experience with the risen Jesus." Mm-hmm. It's just he said, she said. How do you like?
We look at the evidence that followed. Both claim to have experience with God. What evidence followed them? So we see from Paul, for example, Paul had witnesses to his experience. He had witnesses and people that attested to his experience. Muhammad didn't. Muhammad was alone in that cave and had no other apostle or messenger to confirm that what he experienced was of God. Paul did. Okay, that's one. Secondly, what works followed them? We see that Paul was a murderer, was a bringing in the people of God and imprisoning them, persecuting the church. He was a persecutor of the church. He had his experience, changed his entire life and mindset around to where now he's preaching the gospel, preaching Christ as Lord, and siding with the same people he was persecuting, with no worldly gain from it, right? The only gain that he got was, persecution himself and being shipwrecked and beaten and stoned and flogged, imprisoned multiple times, and then ultimately beheaded. With Muhammad, there's nobody that attested to his experience, no other apostle or messenger around to do so. And we see teachings that come from him that you look at are man-made and satanic. Teaching that it is okay to marry, sleep with, and divorce prepubescent girls. That there is an exception to adultery. That you can go in and beat your wife, maybe lightly, whatever you would say, but it's beat your wife. You get all these type of teachings. The gains that he get, the worldly gain he gets, that even Aisha says, I feel as if your Lord hastens to fulfill your desires.